Well, it's time to get started, and you guys who are on Zoom, Dahlia, Daniel, Evelyn, Gabriella, and Julia, please send me an email so that I get my participation score correct. Since you're not here physically, I can't put you down as being here, and that has everything to do with contact tracing and emergency situations. If, God forbid, the bus carrying a group of students got in an accident, they try to track down where the students are, whether they're on that bus or did they come to class. And so this is what they would look for. Anyway, stuff like that. Stuff I don't even want to think about, but participation, you guys are participating and you'll get credit for your participation. So I'd like to start today with the groups for the research PowerPoint presentation. And here's who I have so far, these pairings. And that means I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 people not paired yet. And I'd really like to see you guys get paired up with someone. And we've had somebody drop this class. So I got an odd number. So one group will have 3. And with the consent of the other 2, I'd be happy to add a third onto your presentation group, or however you do this. And let me know. I'm not forcing people into working with people, but the ones I don't have paired are Morea, Tori, Daniel, Joshua, Nina, Logan, and Kelsey. Kelsey's not here. Some of you guys are on Zoom to say. And I'm also launching quiz 4 for you. And as you can see, it's available until midnight on the 4th. It's due on the 3rd at 11:59. That's 1, 2, 3, yeah. So anyway, we'll meet one more time before this is due. And so anyway, this is what I want you to do. And I want to talk about it and explain it. And it is designed to pretty much give you guys a jump start on this PowerPoint presentation assignment. So I'll read it, you listen, we'll get through. And in the text, docx or PDF, write a 2 or 3 paragraph essay regarding why and how you chose the subject of your group presentation. Now, for the presentation, 2 of you will be doing 1 subject. For this, and especially since not everybody's paired yet, you can do the same thing you and your partner agree upon, the subject, or you can do something that you think might be a good subject for the presentation. If you're not paired with a partner, your essay might serve as an argument for making your choice the subject of the group's research. So you might write something, turn it in, make a good case for a particular artwork. Somebody else that doesn't have a partner said, hey, you know what? That looks good to me. So I need to get your choices down, but hopefully this will help you decide what your group will present. So for you individually, 2 or 3 paragraph essay. And what I want you to tell me is about your personal feelings about the work and your opinion of the work. So usually I ask for more factual information. I still want to know what it is, what it's called, and etc. But as usual, something from the textbook. But I want to know how you feel about the work. And so I want you to use all of the proper terminology, the language of the discipline and the culture. Because a lot of things that we talk about are really not artistic terms, but they're terms about the culture, the religion, the politics, the geography, or something like that. And include the formal characteristics of the work. So you might like this particular work for a particular reason. I want you to talk about it. And then, once you've got that much done, you can use that as part of your narrative in the PowerPoint presentation. So this essay may be included in your group presentation as narration. It could serve as an introduction, which seems logical, which is actually what a lot of people do. They say, we chose this work because I like this, this reminds me of something, this is my heritage. And so it could be an introduction, a mid-presentation reflection, when you hit the points in your presentation that align with this essay, you can insert it there as part of your narration or as a reflection or conclusion. And it says all group members' narration will be included in the PowerPoint. And I say that, and then I remember we're not all on the same page. So if you have a preference to write about something and it's not what your group chooses, you can say that in your presentation. We are doing Stonehenge. My partner wanted to do the pyramids at Giza. We flipped a coin. We did the pyramids. Something. But at any rate, I want to see something about what you do for this quiz in that PowerPoint narration. And so that's it. I'm getting some inbox traffic here. Good. You guys are telling me you're here on Zoom. Good. I like that. Bottom line, back to the subject. Any questions about what I'm asking you to do? It's kind of it's a beginning step, maybe not a first step, but it's an early step in putting visual information into language. Teresa. If you chose something new, that would be okay. And I have to do that. I wrote this thinking that everybody would be paired up and have chosen a subject. That didn't happen. So yeah, the answer is yes. And in fact, I'm sure some of these groups, some of these groups don't even know you're a group yet. Some of them don't know what you're going to present yet. So absolutely. Bismarck.
So at this, we have to like talk about with the artwork or the architecture. So we'll have to say like why we chose it.
Yes, what do you like about it? Yes. Because under all of this stuff, and as an artist, I am ambivalent about this aspect of art. But sometimes you really like art. And sometimes you really don't like art. It's the way it is. It's part of the discipline. And I think it's an important part of the discipline. It's how you respond to it. And like I say, I'm ambivalent about that. Oh, like sometimes I think if I'd have been a mathematician, what can you not like about 5 times 3 equals 15? There's no like or dislike, it just is. And a lot of people like to talk about art as it just is. But art goes deeper. Art is something I hope you guys, if you didn't like it before you got here, I hope you like it by the time you get. Any other questions? Well, okay. I got something else here I wanted to show you guys. I found this talking about how I like this stuff. I found this. And this is in a new window. Want to make sure I got the right share. Oh, we can do that. You'll see it. What we have, I was watching TV the other night, and they had a trailer, a commercial for the new Marvel Comics movie, The Eternals. And there was a flash of this in the trailer. This is the Ishtar Gate from Babylon. It is in the museum, the National Museum in Berlin. And you see comic book movies. Eternals photos tease a visit to the ancient city of Babylon. This shows up in that movie. And I don't have the trailer for the movie, but there were a lot of different things posted on this. And these are the photos of the actual Ishtar Gate. But here are some photos of where they were doing the stage set. This didn't have Alec Baldwin there, didn't shoot anybody. But just saying. But this is how they did it. And this is, and it says Eternals new set photos teases Babylon, also reveals timeline. I played this video and it's kind of hard to understand. I think it's from India. And I think the narrator goes from English to Hindi, goes back and forth. Bottom line is that these kind of movies are global. They're like, these are the biggest box office draws in the entire world. These things will go viral, except they're in the cinemas, but maybe there's viral cinema. I don't Anyway, yeah, this is kind of cool. And it's what another legacy issue. And so enable editing slideshow from the beginning. Let me see, I got the right share. Yeah, that's what I want. We were talking about medieval times. And we saw the photo, or I mean, excuse me, the video on manuscript illumination, manuscript illustration, if you will. And so, I'll try to get this where we can all see. One of the characteristics of a lot of this early manuscript illumination is really that you can kind of take a look at a lot of their art and see influences of the Celtic, where the knots are here. We saw that here. And so we know that this is something that happened in Scandinavia, and they passed it along, and you know, even to the point where we're seeing Celtic crosses with that same, what they call now Celtic knots, but it's kind of a braid, it's kind of a interlocking rope pattern on line. So we got kind of the history of the arts. It doesn't really go too far away from religion. And it's mostly done away from the cities. And so you can see a lot of things that come into play. And I say that this Celtic knot, this is also a characteristic of a lot of Islamic art. We've seen the patterning in the mosque and all the beautiful wall adornments. And so we don't really know, but we don't have people to say, oh, these guys influenced us. But you can see a lot of things kind of coming together in medieval Europe. And what happens at that time, we talked about this, the Vikings were pretty much pillaging the cities. And in fact, they had a recent discovery that the Vikings made it, they got definitive proof now that they made it all the way to North America, almost 500 years before Columbus. The Vikings, we talked about the boat. The reason the boat could work is because it's really quite a great design. It's not that much different from what we seen the Egyptians develop. The Khufu solar boat, really kind of similar. It's very long, it's narrow, and it has what we call a shallow draft, which means it doesn't sink into the water very much. It floats on top of the water, which allowed the Vikings to go all the way down the rivers of Europe and plunder all of the cities, pillage. But they didn't steal, they pretty much burned down. And so all of the culture that survives from this time mostly comes out of the monasteries, comes out of the places that were set aside, built outside the cities, typically in a secluded place, typically with walls, and they look like fortresses. They're impenetrable, not easily found, not easily attacked, and self-sufficient. If you go to a lot of the monasteries, they grew their own crops, they had livestock. It was a self-sustaining village in itself. And so that's And what they did to occupy themselves often was that they transcribed books. I talked to you about that, about what they did in Baghdad at the same time. They were bringing scholarly texts from China, from Greece, from all over the world, and translating those texts into Arabic and creating great libraries. Well, Europe didn't have great libraries at this time. In fact, they were just kind of hanging on for dear life, if you will. But in those monasteries, they kept the culture, they kept the text, they kept the knowledge safe. And so anyway, this is an interesting, they call this a scriptorium. And so anyway, it's basically tempera on parchment. It's a manuscript illumination or illustration, if you will. But I'm going to show you this. And so how this is put together, it's a house. It's got a tower. It's got ladders to get from one floor to the next. It's like, what, 5 stories or so. And the cutaway is kind of interesting. And how the figures are depicted is kind of interesting. Interesting in that this is 970, and it's from Spain. I don't know if you remember this, but when we were looking at Islamic art, I showed you a drawing, a small painting that looked like it was Japanese. It had some of the same characteristics, the cutaway view, the kind of perspective that didn't really make any sense in terms of real space, but things were tilted so you could understand what was going on. In the example from the last chapter, we saw stairways. These are ladders, but the ladders are turned up on their side so that you can see that they are ladders. These figures here, I think that they look in a lot of ways like something out of ancient Chinese or Japanese art. So mind you, this is the time that this stuff was being done in the Arabic world. We see this, and we know that Spain itself was part of the Islamic world, and it was fought over for a long time. But this is yet just another example of those two places from very far away, long distances, and how they influence each other's culture. And so for me, I don't think any of this stuff is accident. I think this is a learned thing, my personal opinion. And so this is from folio 3 recto, which means the right-hand page. You can see how it's cut off here. Ink gold on vellum. We talk about vellum. What is vellum? Vellum. It's like a milkshake. Do you want chocolate or vellum? Wait, no, that's vanilla. Sorry, I'm old. I get stuff mixed up. Vellum is a kind of a paper, and it's kind of a half paper. It's half leather. It's made from sheep's skin, and sheep are really among the staple livestock that you find, you know, for centuries in the Middle East, in Europe, all over the place. Sheep, they do a lot of things. One is that a lot of people eat sheep but they provide wool. You let them grow out, shear them, take their hair, which is essentially what that is, and weave it into wool. And as another byproduct, you can get vellum. It's their skin. And back in the old days, we used to talk about, and oh, by the way, vellum was used for only the most important documents, like a prayer book, like a Bible, like a Quran, like a lot of things that were extremely important. And that persisted really until modern times. Even when I was a kid, diplomas were printed on vellum. And if you are a printmaker, you can still get vellum. It's a very highly prized, very, very lush kind of paper. It's like the gold standard of paper. And so anyway, that's what vellum is. And back when I was your age, they would talk about, did you get your sheepskin yet? Which was another way of saying, did you get your diploma? Have you gotten your degree? Because they were printed on sheepskin. Yeah, I'm here working on my sheepskin. Say it. So anyway, we know this is Christ enthroned. Doesn't have the beard, but this is why we looked at that iconography so extensively. Doesn't have the beard, but he is giving it a sign of peace and or the blessing, if you will. He's got the holy book in his hand, and he's got the halo with the cross behind it. And the other part is enthroned. And we've talked about a lot of those ideas already. And I want to show you some of this because look at this patterning. This looks like it's like what I'm talking about. This looks like it could have come right out of the moss. And there's some other examples here that I'll show you that are it's just too much of a coincidence. Anyway, what we find here oftentimes is that these monks in the monasteries, oftentimes they depict the saints that wrote the Gospels. They kind of saw themselves as being like them. That was their role model. That's who they aspired to be. That's where they got their inspiration. And so we got St. Matthew here, another St. Matthew. And this is Utrecht Psalter, which is a prayer book. And what you see here, a lot of, this is starting to develop here into not so much about the elaborate illustrations, but sometimes just drawings. And anyway, like this. This is more from the Utrecht Psalter. And I think that in a lot of ways, I find the drawings that really kind of very intriguing myself because they look like they could have been done recently. This is how a lot of artists do draw when they're not regulated to do things in a particular sort of way, when they're not got a step-by-step way of doing things, when they don't have to follow, if you will, the conventions of painting and all of that other stuff. So it's really kind of cool. And here's a schematic plan for a monastery, what I was talking about. And you can see central in here is prayer, all the chapel, and you got various rooms for different things. And I'm sure that some of these are dorms, their quarters, their bedrooms, and some of these others could be kitchens, could be workspaces, could be libraries, and so on. And so I'm talking about the monasteries. Do any of you know where monasteries might exist in today's world? And it's not just something that's Christian. You go into the Himalaya, these masks, I keep tripping on this thing. You go to the Himalayas, you'll see Buddhist monasteries high in the Himalayas. And it's not unlike what we see going on in Europe. And it's like what was going on in Europe. These places are hard to get to. They're self-sustaining. They are their own community. And they spend much of their life working and praying. There are also monasteries in a lot of other religions and a lot of religious traditions. There were a group called Essenes from Judaism back at the time of Christ. They lived out away from Jerusalem. And they believed they were the source for the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were thinkers, philosophers, priests, rabbis, holy people. But today's world, okay, you're not all jumping up and saying, Clayton Road in Ladue, Carmelite Monastery. It's a group of Catholic nuns, and they are cloistered, and they do the monastic tradition quite well. Cloistered means that they don't have contact with the outside world. They spend their time, much as these folks did 1,000, 12, 1,500 years ago. And they make things, they don't make handwritten Bibles, but they do make prayer cards. They do make things like rosaries and things. They sell them. And the reason I know so much about this, partly I'm a Catholic, partly because my wife worked at the Carmelite Monastery for about 8 years before she retired. And she was their face to the world because, as you might guess, stay cloistered for everything. Somebody's got to pay the electric bill. Somebody's got to make sure the trash man comes. Somebody's got to pay the groundskeepers. Whatever. That was my wife's too. Bottom line, they still made it. They still grew. They have vineyard. They grow fruit. It's not unlike 1,000 years ago. And so, here, the Landau Gospels. And this is like a good example of a Bible in real life that looks like the kind of Bible depicted in a lot of this iconography. You take a look at the iconography, the paintings of Christ, for instance, here, this is kind of a simplistic version, but typically you'd see a cross prominent, and you would see it adorned with precious stones and gold. And this is where it is. This is what they did. And this is, and so the other part of it is, it's gold, it's gold leaf. And again, wonder the Otto III enthroned. What happens in Europe as the Vikings, the threat from the Vikings subsides towards 900, 1,000 Vikings is kind of, and Europe kind of reconsolidates. I'll show you this. This is This is a statue, we believe it is of Charlemagne or Charles the Bald, but what we have is a development of the Holy Roman Empire. And they consolidate power, and it's basically, you say it's a Holy Roman Empire, it encompasses France and Germany and Italy, this whole chunk of Central Europe. And the real power and authority comes from Rome. And so the Pope still is in charge of everything. But we have these military and political rulers that emerge. And they were called Holy Roman Emperors, and Charlemagne was the first Holy Roman Emperor. And so we have a long line of succession, and so that's kind of where we're talking about. Charles the Bald, Otto III, another Holy Roman Emperor. Oh, tempera on vellum. Oh, that vellum is coming back. And you see, here he is. He's surrounded by warriors, spear, sword. On this side, a monk, another priest, both holding Bibles. He's got the shield with the cross on it, allegiance to Christianity or the papacy, if you will. But none of these people ever become royalty without the consent or the appointment, if you will, of the Pope. And one of the things about life in medieval times in Europe is that these leaders, these Holy Roman Emperors, they're kind of at the top of the pyramid, but there becomes a whole system of governance. And we still kind of see little bits of it today. First of all, you got the Holy Roman Emperor on the top, but they develop a whole system of other types or other ranks, if you will, in royalty. So you got earls, you got barons, you got dukes, you got viceroys, you got marquises, you got all of these other kinds of royalty, and they each have their own fiefdom. So like somebody like Otto III would be the grand ruler over a large swath of Europe, but in these individual places, you'll see these places called duchies, which would be run by a duke and a duchess, and so on. So this whole kind of what we call feudal system arises, and it's how things are governed at this time. And if you were in royalty at this time, you were expected, you were the guy that actually owned everything, so you would be in charge of the agriculture and so on. But you were royalty in this era, you were expected to have a lot of children, and those children would be assigned particular duties. And one of them would be that you would send one of your male children to be the heir apparent, the prince, if you will. And then you got other children. One might be assigned to be in a monastery, that they would give up their whole life in a monastery. Another one might be a bishop or a cardinal, have a high rank in the church. Others might be a military leader. And you would always give one or more of your female children off to the religious order of the area. They would become a nun. And so anyway, that's kind of how things went. And that's reflected in the artwork we see. Here's another one of those Celtic crosses, and instead of the instead of the Norse knot pattern, we have here something we've seen since antiquity. Friezes, little sections telling a story, carved in relief, goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, the work of base and so on. Architecture, kind of simple. And this is in San Juan Bautista, and obviously in Spain. And this is what a Christian place of worship would have looked like back in the Middle Ages. This is pre-Islam. But bottom line is that the development of architecture was slow, and it resembled a lot of inventions from the Middle East, from mosques. So here we go. This is the Palatine Chapel of Charlemagne. So this, we're talking Holy Roman Empire. And it's got the archways, which we can attribute to classic Rome. They invented the archways. And the columns invented simultaneously by a lot of cultures. We see them at the Palace of Knossos, and we see them in Egypt, Greece, Rome, and so on. But look at these archways. This is right out of a mosque. This is right out of Islam. We see that archway with alternating stones of dark and light stones to make this striped archway. Another thing that starts to show is the kind of patterning. I was talking about that in just a moment ago in manuscript illustration. We see it happening again inside the churches that they're building. And again, like right here, this is right out of Islam as well. Hey, I got a chat. What here? iPad died. Okay, sorry, Daniel. Words, proverbs, quotations from the Holy Book, from the Bible, from the Gospel, etc. Part of what happens. We don't see that quite so much before this, but it is something that has developed. So for me, I really believe there was a lot of interaction. Here's the outside of that very same chapel. And again, it's my zoom. We're talking about that geometric patterning. That's what's on the stained glass here. It's not like stained glass we'll see later. A tour hall, which is kind of a public place in Germany. Got a couple of turrets on the outside, got a bell tower. And just say, what would happen at the time in this culture was that if something was happening, there was an emergency or something, when people needed to be gathered together, they would ring the bell. Actually, that will evolve into bell towers in Christian cathedrals, to be sure. But anyway, Abbey of Saint Riquier. And this is a monastery. And so see the walls, the turrets, the fortification, the idea that it's going to be like really hard to get in here. They could defend this from invaders. And so over time, these churches, these cathedrals, this is the Abbey Church. And again, the abbeys were away. They were not right in the center of town at the time. But they get taller And they start to take on the look of what will become Gothic architecture. And so we have this. This is the apsidal part. I'll show you this on the inside. And again, folding chairs, like I say, none of these places were built with pews. The idea is that people would sit, stand, kneel on the floor. But take a look at some of this. We're starting to see a lot more decorations on that surface. It's still rather plain for most of this, but we're starting to see some of that idea come around. And they get more grand, more elaborate. And again, there's St. Michael's in Hildesheim. Check these archways. And the doors, this is an interesting thing. What we have here, a lot of these cathedrals, these churches, these chapels, these baptistries are built with big, heavy bronze doors. And like a lot of things, they had to defend themselves against invaders and robbers and looters and that sort. So a lot of these buildings, they're actually in some ways like fortifications themselves. But these doors, you could hit these things with a battering ram, really strong. And they were typically decorated with scenes from the Bible. And again, we want to talk about that just a little bit. But you can see the crucifixion here. And you can see this is probably Herod condemning Christ to death. He's on the throne. There's Jesus. Got the big halo. Bottom line, biblical scenes, and for a population that is largely illiterate, there's a reason for a lot of this stuff, and they start to really pick up on it. This is, I thought this wasn't interesting. That's why I put a star by it. We saw these spiral reliefs throughout history. Now, we saw those in Mesopotamia. We saw like Trajan's column, which has Trajan's victories and all the other stuff in the early era of CE, the Common Era. And so anyway, you know, we're really like the rest of the world, they're coming back. We're talking about the 600s, 700s, where it was still kind of the dark ages. By the time we're into the 11th century, they start to rebuild. Adam and Eve. I always thought this was kind of cool. This is God. There's the tree of knowledge. They just ate the forbidden fruit. Why I like this is because this kind of becomes sort of a model for what will follow. They have to, we haven't seen any nudes for about almost 1,000 years. We saw that in Greco-Roman art. Then we didn't see it. Not nudes, not naked people, hardly at all. And it was about this time where they kind of figured that they have to do these people, and if you think about the book of Genesis, and then they discovered they were naked and ashamed. That's what's happening here. And so they got leaves, they're covering themselves with leaves. And that becomes kind of a standard thing. You can have the nudity with not getting too explicit by having them cover themselves. I always like this portrayal for another reason. There's Adam. What's he doing? He's blaming Eve. She told me, come on, God. You can, yeah. And so, and they have to do something here to make sure that we know that this is Eve and this tiny little thing there, that's her breast. So it is clear somewhat that this is Eve. And there's the serpent, so on. Ivory carving, not quite as elaborate what we see going on in the Middle East, but they're using it and they're starting to get pretty good at it. Otto the First presenting Magdeburg Cathedral to Christ. And so here is Otto. And that was kind of how they viewed making a church, that these emperors were building these, not for themselves and not for their own glorification, but for the glorification of Christ. And so there it is. There's a model of the cathedral. There's Christ. We know that's him. He's got the book, got the halo, got the beard, not giving a signed piece. He's taking the cathedral. I'll take that off your hands, Otto. Again, Otto II, Theophano, Christ, through the Pope, through Christianity, anointing these Holy Roman emperors, excuse me. And so, crucifix commissioned by Yarrow. This is in Cologne. This is, we're getting right toward the turn of the millennia. We know this is Christ, got that same halo, got the beard. One of the things that's interesting about this is that we see Christ suffering. That may not be a big thing in today's world, but it was a theological proposition. It was a point of contention. How would you portray Jesus as suffering and dying when he is all-knowing and lives forever? And so you see a lot of portrayals, especially through the Byzantine period, of a Christ on the cross and doesn't have his head down, his head straight up, and he's looking right back at the viewer. And I'm up here for you. You are a sinner. And it's a change. It's a change in the theology. It's a change in how they look at the crucifixion. And we start to see this actually start to appear. Crucifix too, INRI, which means Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And so, well, let me see. Let me see if I got my right share. That looks okay. Still got that on there. I have this up here. It's I will take a look at it. I'll just show you. Oh, control. There we go. We'll see if the guys at home can see it. Yes, good. Archaeologists in Norway find rare Viking ship burial using only radar. So what I was showing you last week about the dig, or on Tuesday, I guess, about the dig and how they found these burial mounds, and that was kind of a clue. Because we have all of this technology. Today, ground penetrating radar. This is underground. They just go out and look, and they found this Viking ship. And the idea, again, Sutton Hoo was not an outlier. There's probably dozens, if not hundreds, of those Viking ships buried with their sea captains or kings or queens. And so anyway, discover the findings without having to dig into any land using ground penetrating radar. And so, I want to point this out too, right where I got this. In the Antiquity Journal, when we were talking about primary sources and peer-reviewed sources, this is a peer-reviewed journal. And so a lot of times when you see somebody like CNN or NBC or any of them reporting on this kind of news, typically they'll cite the journals where they come from. It's a part of responsible journalism. So, Romanesque, and this is another kind of, we're talking about the Holy Roman Empire, and that's really what the Roman in Romanesque refers to. And so this is Western Europe around 1100. And as I was saying, this big chunk right here, this is Charlemagne's territory. Of course, this is a couple of hundred years, more than a couple of hundred years after Charlemagne. And France breaks off, the Norman kingdom breaks off. And so these Normans, they are Saxons, and these guys are Anglos, and we call this Anglo-Saxon culture, just saying. Second thing is that they actually have some influence down there in the Mediterranean too, but it's the Norman kingdom, France, and again, even at 1100, we got the Iberian Peninsula still divided between realm of Christian rulers and Islamic Umayyad Caliphate. And so anyway, this is what we're talking about. Jesselbertus, the Last Judgment, Tympanium. Tympanium's really kind of what goes in over the archway. We talked about the pediments of ancient Greece. What we see here is this new idea of a tympanium. And here we are, the Last Judgment. There's Christ. And, so what do you think? These the good people? These the bad people? These are the little people. They're suffering. They're not going to be cast away here. Just saying. And that's on the right hand of God. So anyway, Romanesque. Number of changes here. We have the Crusades, as I've talked about. Once we establish the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope gets to appoint kings, emperors, and so on, it's not too long before they start organizing and wanting to go back to Jerusalem, specifically Jerusalem, but the Holy Land in general, and wanting to reclaim that for Christianity. It's remarkable to me that we see a lot of things from the Islamic world, and they're showing up in Europe, whether it's some of the stuff I showed you last week, canteen, the baptistry, stuff like that. They talked about how the Sultan in Jerusalem gave Charlemagne a water clock that was in the convent. Charlemagne didn't know what the heck it was. They thought it was some kind of. Anyway, one of the things about the Crusades was that they wanted to reclaim Jerusalem, but they also wanted to bring back artifacts. And so this is a stained glass piece, St. Louis delivering the crown of thorns. It's our St. Louis, right here, what this town was named after. And secondly, the idea that he could actually, after 1100, 1200 years, find that crown of thorns that was put on Christ's head before he was crucified, or as he was being crucified. It shows. But they were on a mission. And this is a reliquary. Statue of Saint Faith, 10th, 11th century, with later additions of jewelry and stuff. Reliquary. Reliquary. Yes. Yeah, it's a container for relics. Absolutely. Caught that. Perfect. Oh. And so in the Catholic faith, having relics is kind of like a really big deal. We still do that. I say we because I'm still a Catholic, but relics are important. There are in any Catholic church supposed to be in the altar somewhere in there a relic of the saint the church was named after. And a relic could be anything. It could be a piece of clothing. It could be a ring. It could be bones. It could be other possessions. It could be something. A crown of thorns, that's like super relic. When we were talking about Constantinople in the early years when Constantine moved the capital of the empire, he sent his mother, Helena, known as Saint Helena in the Catholic Church, to Jerusalem and Damascus and through the Middle East, trying to find all of the artifacts and trying to identify the holy places mentioned in the Bible. And so the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is in Jerusalem, we believe that to be the Holy Sepulchre because Helen decided that's where it was. And so anyway, they were down there she was down there trying to find splinters from the true cross, Christ's burial site, anything. Relics are big. There are some famous relics. There's this relic called the Shroud of Turin. You've never heard of it. And it is supposedly the linen that Christ's body was buried in after he was taken from the cross. And it has blood stains and it has an imprint that looks like Christ's face. It's in the Vatican. It showed up in Turin, but part of that's because all of this other kind of stuff I'm talking about, like this. A lot of people going over to the Middle East and taking stuff and bringing it back. Anyway, this is a reliquary. And there are relics of Saint Faith in this thing. You can see there's probably a door right there or right here. But yeah, and who knows what's in there, but bottom line is that that's been part of the Christian tradition since Constantine. And so we start to see something happen here. These churches start to get taller and bigger. And this is the plant at St. Etienne. And here's the apsidal altar space. Bottom line is that this looks a lot like the earlier ones. This is what it looks like on the inside, something like this, long with an apse, a circular apse. Oh, we're starting to see again this. The archways, portable chair, the same, and the apse. And so here's where I wanted to conclude today, because this is a little later. This is kind of where we start to move right into full-blown Gothic. And so it has the same kind of plan that we see in this, Saint Etienne. But it has this. And what they decide is that the floor plans should resemble the cross. And so, again, when we look at architecture from the Islamic world, we saw a lot of mosques. And when we're looking at architecture from the European continent at the same time, let's see, a lot of cathedrals and churches. I think that bottom line, that should tell you the power structure, the authority, who had the money, what their priorities were, what the culture was all about. So with that being said, any questions? I got people far away zooming in on us. No Zoom questions? No questions from the audience? What you got?
The quiz board can be over anything.
Yes. And it can serve as an argument to your potential partners as to why you should choose this work. But yeah, anything from the text, just like the PowerPoint. You guys aren't dumb. You guys are productive. You got things to do. I'm not keeping you any longer. Have a good weekend. Fort Myers Beach.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice. I have relatives in Florida. We don't quite, yeah. Mine are more from the Tampa area,
Yeah,
but we go down to Fort Myers.
we go there every summer almost. That's great.
Oh, it's
It's
beautiful.
fun. Good time.
Yeah.
That's the yesterday.
Oh, sweet, yeah. Richard Haas.
Yep. So I normally don't pass it. I get off at Jefferson, which is technically, well, I actually get off at Market Street. So
Yeah,
right before that
Jefferson
main
and
bridge.
Market,
Yeah.
yeah, right
I
there.
get off right there. But when I go to the reptile center in I have to take that out of it.
Yeah, you almost have to go past. The only other place you can get on, I think, it's like Broadway.
Yeah, because you only can see it when you're coming this way. You
Exactly.
can't see it when you're on the bottom level.
And that's still, that's a sore spot for me too. Because
That's
if
cool.
they would connect up like they did 44, 55, and
Mhm.
70,
Yeah,
they would connect 40 to them.
Yeah, it'd be cool. Yeah, it would be.
All right, have a good weekend, Logan.
Me too.
See ya.